All right, Doug, we're back. We want to talk about a few different countries. Today, I happen to be in Brazil, so that would certainly be one of them. But first, this day in history, what can we learn?
Well, there are always sad lessons from history, I'm afraid. Um, First thing that I noted was that was today in 1957 that the Edsel came out to greet the world, and it's said that in constant dollars anyway, the Edsel is the biggest disaster that Ford has ever had. Maybe their
The Ford Lightning
experience.
truck or something.
Well, and maybe with their electric vehicles, apparently I've heard this. How can they lose $50,000 a vehicle? I mean, I don't know, but let's say not counting that one because that might be bigger. The Edsel was the biggest one, and the reason I think the Edsel failed. I remember the Edsel from back in those days. It was kind of a mid-range car, uh, like the Mercury. I don't know if the Mercury even still exists. All these
It's
old
gone.
brands.
They got rid of the brand. Yeah, it's
Yeah, they
gone.
get a run of all these brands. So anyway, why did the Edsel fail? I think it failed because if you look at a picture of an Edsel, its front grille is like a giant oval. And it's like saying, I'm sucking. It's like telling you that I suck, this giant oval. Anyway, that's what they say. I don't know why else it would have failed. It was supposed to have been for that era when all cars were crappy, quite frankly. It was supposed to be a relatively decent car. But the reason I wanted to talk about the Edsel for a moment is that it was actually the brainchild of Robert S. McNamara. And McNamara was during World War II uh, responsible for the bombing of civilian areas of cities to demoralize the enemy and destroy their industrial base and bullshit. But it's basically a war crime to bomb cities where civilians are, really, for whatever reason. So that was McNamara's baby. And but he ran it so well. I mean, they blew up so much stuff and killed so many people that he got this job with Ford. And then he advanced to the Edsel, which was his baby, which almost destroyed Ford Motor Company. And then he got promoted upward again. The next thing that he did was that the World Bank that he worked for next? Yes, I think it was the World Bank that he worked for next, where he was doing things like building building to industrialize Africa. He was building steel mills in the middle of nowhere where there are no nearby coal supplies, and that was a disaster. And what was the last thing that he did?
Well,
Uh,
he was Secretary of Defense, right?
Secretary of Defense, of course, the Vietnam War. He kind of capped off his career with the biggest disaster of all. Uh, and when I was living in Aspen, he gave a speech at the in the Aspen Music Tent, and it was a bullshit speech. And he had question. It was very daring because Aspen's a left wing crowd, and I why didn't I ask him this question? I was going to do it. I would have had to stand in line with some other people, but I could ask him the question. And my question was, Mr. McNamara, how is it that you've gone from, you know, mass murder in World War II to almost destroying the Ford Motor Company to wasting many billion dollars with the World Bank to going on to the Vietnam War? How come it is you're able to stand here and not be pelted with rotten vegetables? That's a question. I mean,
I think it's a great question. I think there's other questions too. It's like, how does a guy like, I mean, how does he go from one stunning failure to another? Like, how is it, what kind of system, makes that possible?
I think he's a very intelligent guy that can spin a good tale based upon numbers and computer studies,
Right.
even before they really had computers, obviously.
So like basically he was one of the original liars with statistics kind of guys.
He was a member of what they called the whiz kids
Oh.
that in the Kennedy administration. They were called the
Hmm.
whiz kids because they were so smart. And there's nothing worse than, I mean, a sociopath is bad, but a smart sociopath, that's really bad.
No kidding.
So anyway, the Edsel brings back memories of McNamara. I'd say RIP, but I hope it should be BIH, burn in hell, RIP. Uh, then next thing I've got is Steve Irwin, uh, the Crocodile Man, died in 2006, and I enjoyed his show where he'd stick his hand into a hole that he knew for a fact was full of deadly brown snakes or taipans or God knows what in Australia, where absolutely everything will kill you. And then oddly, he was killed by a stingray that was kind of an accident, really. He was swimming above it, and I don't know. He was such a fun, enjoyable guy. Always saying, "Mites, let's stick our finger up his bum and see what he does." So I'm sorry that he was gone, but anyway, that was today in 2006. Uh, anyway, life goes on.
Yeah, you were telling me before about some interesting news in Congo. Um,
Yes, I one of the advantages of living in South America is that a lot of U.S. publications, in particular, the Fag Hag Rag, WAPO, and the New York Times, both give you very heavily discounted subscriptions prices. And so I have subscriptions to both. Anyway, today, or yesterday, I should say, the New York Times sent me a notice because I asked them to tell me about what happens in Africa. That in Congo, they had a huge jailbreak accompanied by many murders. And this is an interesting story, according to the Times. I think it's pretty accurate. That in Kinshasa, the capital of the Congo, Congo's got 100 million people, a surprisingly large number, because they really do multiply over there. And Kinshasa's got, nobody knows, but something like 15 million people, probably more. Now, you'd think in a rather lawless country like the Congo, it would be full of jails and prisons. The Times says that there's only one prison in Kinshasa. It was built in 1957 by the Belgians, has a capacity of 1,200 people. But there's something like 12 or 15,000 people in this 1,200. So the fact is that if you're once you're in that jail, there's no place to lay down. You can forget about that. It's just to sit and swelter in the heat. People die of heat stroke and heat exhaustion and all this type of thing. So it's very understandable that the inmates just said enough is enough. And somehow they managed to conduct a jailbreak, but the guards sitting in their towers or whatever they were doing killed about 50 or 60 of them. I don't know how many were wounded, or didn't really say. They probably don't keep count of that type of thing. But I think the whole thing is just quite interesting. And there were a couple of cell phone pictures of the conditions there, and it was true. These people are, it's almost standing room only in these cells. And people are sleeping in the laboratory facilities, which are overflowing. I mean, it's actually a circle of hell. They've got these people. So of course they made up jailbreak.
yeah, and I'm sure the rest of the people there wish that they would do it more often so they'd clear up some more floor space.
I would think so. So, you know, the Congo is one of those places that the story is going to end very badly. And I've said before, because this is just repeating the United Nations numbers, They say that by the end of this century, the largest city in the world is not going to be in India or China. It's going to be, they're both, all three are in Africa. It's going to be Lagos, Nigeria, that the UN projects at 200 million people in Lagos. I'm not talking about the country. No, 100 billion for Lagos and 85 million for Kinshasa and 70 million for Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. It's not going to happen though, because the population is going to implode and collapse long before that happens, I think.
It can't support it, you would think, but I just saw an update. Apparently, there were 129 dead in the
Oh,
Congo prison jailbreak.
okay. So the number has gone up with
Yeah,
time.
they're counting, I guess.
And I'm sure that whatever medical facilities that the wounded, well, forget about medical facilities. I mean,
No,
they don't even feed them. They don't even have food. I mean, I don't know what these people have done. A lot of them are probably political prisoners, or God knows why these people are in jail. Some of them are actually hardcore criminals, of course.
you got to imagine though, like let's say you have somebody, you put somebody in there, and then they serve their time, and now you go try and find them. Like, how do you even locate one of your prisoners? I mean, in this place, it's so
I,
overwhelmed, so many different people.
I don't know. And I don't know if I'm ever going to go back to the Congo, but it would be interesting to visit that prison just to see what it's like if you die and go to hell, what it might be like.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm reading Dante with we're reading the Divine Comedy right now, trying to read it. My daughter and I for homeschool, and going through all the circles. And frankly, this sounds worse than anything that
It's
Dante
terrible.
mentions.
Incidentally, on the Divine Comedy, you got to get the right translation. And I've got several copies of it right here. Do you have the
I don't
one?
know which one it is, but is there one you recommend that you can
Yeah,
remember?
you want the because uh, I've actually, just because it was really interesting. I really like the Inferno. I don't think that Purgatorio and Paradiso are worth
Yeah.
reading. They're just too obscure. But the Inferno is really fun and well written. And I think you want the John Ciardi translation. And well, I'll give you an example how these translations differ, because I remember this. Uh, in one of the cantos, at the end, they're leaving, and one of the devils, uh, uh, Dante says, one translation says, and he made a bugle of his butt, and talking about what the devil did as they were leaving that Bolgia. And the other one, it's translated as made a trumpet of his ass. That's the translations are different, and they're fun in almost all ways.
All
But
right.
I love that. I mean, I remember the first lines from it. It says, midway upon this life's journey, I awoke to find myself in a dark wood. At
Mm,
least the Charity translation, that's what it says. And I think that's very poetic.
yeah, it is.
I
Okay,
hate
I'll make sure we have
poetry
that one. I
generally.
don't think we have that one. It's definitely it's been a slog.
Yeah, no, the Charity one isn't. It's I got it in paperback in high school. Anyway, the Congo. So it'll end. The story in the Congo will end. Bradley should break up into minimum 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 countries. I mean, it's too bad that during the 60s, after the country broke off, became independent from Belgium, there was immediately a secession movement in the Katanga province where the mines were, run by a guy named Moise Tshombe. And there's a movie that I think everybody should see about the Congo. It's a really good movie called Dark of the Sun.
Oh yes, very good. Yep, great movie.
So I don't know if I'll ever go back to the Congo then. It might be more trouble than it's worth.
Probably. Well, speaking of countries that'll break up, seems like a lot of them will. We talked about Brazil as a likely target or subject of a breakup at some point in the future. I'm in Brazil right now. I'm in Sao Paulo. There's no everyone knows, I think, that X or Twitter is banned here right now. that for a while they were finding, I heard that they reversed this, but they were finding people who access Twitter through a VPN $10,000 per instance. So they're really serious on the crackdown there.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a lot of things wrong with Brazil, and it ought to break up into at least three different countries,
Hmm.
more actually. The Northeast, which is totally different in every way, sociologically and climate-wise and everything. And then the South, where you are, Sao Paulo and that, and Amazonia,
Hmm.
different thing entirely.
Yeah, well, it's interesting here. We had one of our file members joined us on our in Uruguay last weekend, and he actually followed. It was, I believe, in response to a Q&A episode we did. He asked us, where should I go? And he gave us three options. He's an Australian, but he has a dual UK citizenship. He was living in UK at the time, or living in London specifically. And he asked, should I go to Australia, the UK, or Brazil? Now he's also married to he has a Brazilian wife, so that was attitude too. And you told him you should go to Brazil, but definitely go to southern Brazil. You said, and it turns out we got to be careful when you offer this advice because people literally follow it, and this guy
No.
did. He's very happy though with the decision.
Well, I was just talking with a close friend. We had lunch today here in Virginia, and his son is in a vastly better position. Talking about giving advice now, is in a vastly better position than the average American. I mean, he's in his 20s. He earns about 120 grand a year. His wife earns about the same. So they're doing pretty good. But they're living in an apartment, not in a big city. We're talking about a medium-sized city. And that apartment costs 34, it's about 1,200 square feet, okay? $3,400 a month. And I said, does that include utilities? And it may not even include, that's a lot of money for a small, relatively small apartment to rent. So now they're having a baby and they feel that they ought to have a house with a yard. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But the way house prices have exploded in the last few years, uh, just the down payment is going to wipe all their savings out. And they're doing really well. Between the two of them, they're earning $250,000 per year. They got $120,000 saved. It's all going to go for a down payment, and not for a particularly big house either. But it's got a yard, it's a nice area, nice schools, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know what the average guy does. When we had lunch today, we went to a place where they serve hamburgers and lobster rolls. Okay. It's nice food, but it's takeout food, but nice takeout food. And so for two hamburgers and two lobster rolls and two drinks and French fries for one French fry, what do you think it costs for those things? And just kind of a takeout where you sit outside.
I mean, I would guess that today it feels like it should be 60, but I'm guessing it was closer to 100.
You're quite correct. It was almost exactly 100. And on top of that, so I used a credit card to pay for it. And the credit card machine gave the option of 18%, 20 or 22%. There's no other option for tips. And you shouldn't tip for where you stand up and they call you for your food and you carry it
Right.
away. But they didn't have much business, and I felt so I left an 18% tip. I said, wait a minute, that's just insane. I mean, because the guy served, he's probably not making all right, I'll give him $5 on that. But actually,
It's
you
still
shouldn't
crazy.
do
I mean,
anything.
and I know you don't go to Starbucks or anything like that, but a couple years ago they started this thing where you go and you pay for a coffee, and then they would have that automatic selection on a computer terminal. They process your credit card and they turn around the terminal facing you, And the first screen is tip, how much tip to leave. So you're buying a, $2 coffee, and you've got people asking for a tip for that at the, again, a takeout service. So this tipping culture in the US has gotten insane, and building it automatically into it is, it's the way they do it. And you feel like an asshole if you say no.
Yeah, it's out of control. It used to be, I mean, showing my age, of course, that standard tip was 10%, and that was 15%. Now the standard tip is probably 20%.
720.
And well, anyway, where's this all going to end?
Well, it just shows, I think, the fact there's so much pressure on it because people are desperate. It gets back to that economic issue you mentioned with your friend's son. I mean, it doesn't, there's not, people don't have money. So they're trying to figure out, they're trying to innovate strategies to get more money without providing more services, right? And tipping is one way to get there.
Well, but to rent an apartment or rent a townhouse, which I guess would have been, this townhouse is around 1,200 square feet, so it's not big. $3,400 a month. I mean, what do you have left after taxes with your paycheck? I mean, that's like 40 grand a year. So how's the average guy live? And then how's he go to a takeout place like we went to? And this is not in New York. We're talking in the middle of nowhere, basically.
Yep. Well,
Okay. So instead of getting 2 lobster rolls, which were $24, we could have just gotten 4 hamburgers. All right, fine. Then the bill would have been $75 instead of $100.
still it's impossible to make it work. And the housing price I happen to see today, you remember we've talked about these Venezuelan migrants and their takeover of these apartment complexes in Aurora. Well, I saw today a guy who went there and interviewed some people who live there. And do you know how much the people that do pay for rent there, which of course the migrants do not pay, but the people who do pay, do you know how much they pay per month for it's just total shithole. I mean, it's just gross. I don't know how big they are, but it's a shithole. Do you have any idea how much they pay?
I'm prepared to be shocked.
$1,400 a month.
Wow.
It's a total shithole where there's shootings all the time. I mean, it's housing is out. It's just incredible. I mean, it's just a disaster.
Yeah. And driving into town, we were listening to NPR, which had a conversation about that. They had somebody from a left-wing NGO with his goofy solutions and somebody from Atlantic magazine, which is ultra-left, who's just written a book about this type of thing. And all their solutions brought the government into the picture. Well, the government ought to do this. Government ought to do that.
And would increase prices. They would
Of
all increase
course.
prices.
And the government's really at fault for all of this, starting with the Federal Reserve, which nobody talked about, needless to say.
No, that's way beyond their understanding, I think. And plus, if you take that away, you take away all the fun tools they have to play with.
Yeah. And of course, we're coming up on the election, and I really hope that I'm dead wrong, but I can't help myself. When we had a Zoom call the other day with our friend Giant Bandari was on, and of course, Giant's hobby horse as an Indian emigre is that he's writing a book where he's warning Americans that they're idiots, and Canadians too, because it's even worse in Canada, that they should not be importing all these feral people, as he quite correctly calls them, from the third world. And he's quite correct. And he goes on and on about it, and he's wonderful to listen to. But I went off on a tangent here, and now I forgot what I was going to say that was relevant to what we were talking about.
Well, to talk about the third world thing for just real quick, in this video where there's interviews of these people in these apartment buildings, some of the neighbors who owned a house across the street from it were complaining. And one of their greatest, obviously the shootings they complained about, but it was the trash that shocked them. There's trash piled up everywhere. And he's like, I don't understand why there's garbage everywhere. And I think this speaks to the kind of thing with importing the third world. There's like a different, there's there's certain things that we take for granted for like the way we're going to conduct ourselves in our affairs. And if you go through a lot of the third world, driving down the highway, garbage everywhere.
Garbage
It's
everywhere.
been right. And that it's like it's such a sure sign that you've imported something much worse than just garbage, I think.
Yeah, you drive down the road in Switzerland and it's just really so clean you feel like you could eat off the road. You drive down a road in any third world country and you can see the national flag of the third world, which is, a paper
A
or I
plastic
should say a
bag.
plastic bag hung in the trees.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is. That's one thing I was really happy when, the first time I came to Uruguay, I was really surprised at how little of any of that there was. It's pretty
Yeah,
clean.
of course, Uruguay is not really a third world
No,
country. It's a European country but Uruguay's government is pretty stupid too. Well, all these governments are pretty stupid. The institution of government is stupid and destructive.
well, speaking of stupid governments, there's just one more thing, one more news item I think is worth talking about. In Argentina, we know that Milei has this shock therapy happening there to try and reshape the way the economy functions, and not everyone's on board with it, especially some specific provinces in Argentina that were huge beneficiaries of the largesse of the state. I mean, they just got sent checks essentially,
Hmm.
and with those checks, they employed the towns. I mean, so in this one city or this one state in particular, it's La Rioja, which I guess is south of Salta, next to Chile still. Um, they're bringing going back to the old playbook they had in the financial crisis in 2000, where they started printing their own money. They call it the Chaco. How do you think that'll work out for them?
It'll work out very badly. If I were, it's just amazing. It's just paper currency so the province can pass off paper that'll be defaulted on. It's really stupid. It's just, these people don't learn anything. And there's nothing Malay can do about it, I don't think.
I also think he's had an attitude of like, hey, if you want to try it, go ahead. I think he has the laissez-faire attitude. What do you get? You want to use a currency, whatever currency you want to use.
Well, and that's the correct attitude. That is the correct attitude. That's right. Let them
But
destroy themselves.
but
And
when the governor demanded they be able to exchange them for pesos, he just laughed at them. He said that was ridiculous.
yeah. Oh, and I remember why it was I brought Giant Bandari up in the Third Worlders. He pointed out that in American elections, typically, the only exception in recent historic times was the election of where Barry Goldwater ran against Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And I think I think it was like 45 to 55, which is an overwhelming landslide for that criminal Lyndon Johnson against Barry Goldwater, who was actually a decent human being. Anyway, typically, that was atypical. The typical US election is like 50-50, like Kennedy, uh, Nixon, or 49-51. It's very close. And Giant pointed out that with the huge influx of migrants, most of whom will be allowed to vote by the Democrats one way with Hooker by crook, as close as these elections usually are, especially with the media overwhelmingly on the Democrat side and academia, propagandizing. And of course, the Democrats are so much more competent at cheating. Uh, he's afraid that the third world factor in the US is going to result in the installing of the Democrats in November. That's his opinion.
It seems like that's the most likely scenario at this point, honestly, third worlders included or not.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's true. And once these people are installed, I mean, they really are going to cement themselves in. And I think there'll be violence because the Trumpers are going to feel enough is enough. We've really been ripped off.
But what
And
could they do? How would they, let's say that happened. How would you imagine they even respond to it? Like, you know,
You can't get violent because you'll absolutely be smacked down by SWAT teams, or forget about that.
Yeah, and it's also be violent toward what exactly? What would you, you
Yeah.
know? I
If
mean,
you
he
live
was,
in a suburb, if you're in a suburb, which where most Republicans live, people don't have mass parades, marches in suburbs. It's not conducive. So
yeah,
what do? You just stay in your house and stew?
I think so. I mean, that's what people have done so far. After, for the most part, that's all people have done in response to the things that have happened with COVID. Of course, there were people who protested on January 6th, and then they were taught a lesson. So I think you're unlikely to see situations like that again.
Yep, very unlikely. And of course, it's not just in the US because I think you pointed out that in Brazil, uh, Twitter or X has been banned and illegalized, and there's 20 million Brazilians that were on it that can't use it now.
Yeah.
And this is a shocking number that we've all heard about how Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, has been locking people up mucho pronto for posting things or saying things. It's
Or
just,
stopping to look at a protest.
yeah, the government in Britain is out of control. But I didn't realize, I read this in my fag hag rag yesterday, I think, that 400 people have been jailed for that. In That's a shocking number. And this
Well,
is like right away. I mean, thrown in jail for these things.
and according to Starmer, like the jails are full, which means there are 400 criminals of other types that have been released, so that those to make space for those guys.
Or maybe they'll just pack them in like they do in the Congo. I mean, anything's possible with these people. And then, of course, in France, you've got Pavel Durov, who runs, what's his
Telegram,
operation? Yes,
Telegram.
yeah. And he's under house arrest or close to
Yeah,
that.
yep, yep. He's got to check in with local police twice a week. I mean, he's on a short leash right now, I guess, pending the legal process there. But there's also, I saw something today that there was. It's hard to believe this is. It feels like we're the same thing again. But I saw this news report today that talked about that Homeland Security and the FBI are amping up their efforts to thwart Russian election disinformation and propaganda. It's like as if Russiagate, we went through Russiagate once, but they're actually uh, starting to work on that again. What was that weird lady that was the minister of truth? Remember that weird lady with that like theater girl who was appointed by Biden to be their minister of truth?
Oh,
It's like they
yeah,
brought that
right,
back.
right,
That
right.
program exists.
Yeah, that's right. The one who had aspirations to sing.
Yeah, but instead she was gonna censor and jail people who say the wrong things. I mean, if you can't get your theater career, then do that. That makes sense.
Well, she'll come back, and I understand that that chap who was in charge of the storage of nuclear waste, who was stealing ladies' suitcases and dressing up in their underwear and stuff like that, he's been rehired, not in the same position. Of course, rehired. I mean, can't let a valuable person like that go unemployed.
Can't get talent is a rare thing, Doug. You gotta
Yes.
when you got it, you gotta hold on to it.
So, my God, I certainly hope that Kamala doesn't win, but she might.
And it does seem like they're going to be ramping up their efforts to control information, to police what people say in the US. I mean, people think you can look at this situation in the UK and it's awful with those 400 people. But remember, last year, there was an American jailed for posting a meme in the 2016 election. I think he got sentenced to 6 years. It took a long time for the legal process, but it was from the 2016 election. It was a meme, and he's in prison right now. So the U.S. has already done this.
Yeah, it's getting dangerous living in the US. And if the Democrats win, it's kind of like game over, man. Pretty much game over because they'll pack the Supreme Court and all the rest of this type of thing. Oh, incidentally, we were talking about the last time, the proper way to pronounce Kamala's name. And I know she had her daughters say how it's, but I wasn't listening. I still don't know what the way she wants it pronounced. But I was thinking in Spanish, Kamala. Well, you could say Kamala, Kamala instead of Kamala, and that just means how bad in Spanish. I hope that's a meme that gets picked up somehow.
Oh, yeah, in Latin America, it definitely could pick up. Well, I mean, there's so many Latin Americans in the US now. I think it could pick up there too.
I hope so. I hope we can start that meme somehow.
Okay, Mala.
I like
That's
that
good.
better than Kamala or whatever you're
Yeah,
supposed to
I think we'll do that. We'll do K Mala from now on.
Kamala.
Yeah.
Or Trump has said Kami, uh, what's he say? Kamimala or
Yeah, I think, yeah,
something like that.
Kamala. Yeah.
Kamala. Yeah, that's kind of cute too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. We'll be back on Friday with questions from people. If you've got questions for Doug, the best way to make sure they get asked is to join our private member group. You subscribe to crisisinvesting.com and you can get priority questions asked. Also, you can put stuff in the comments. I do reread all the comments, but don't always pick up those questions. They aren't prioritized compared to file members, but ask them. We'll see if we get to them.
Good. See you Friday, Matt. See
All right.
everybody else Friday too.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.